Alright guys, it's official. I finished Tom King's run on Batman and I've got a review for you. The question is, can I review 85 issues of Batman in about 15 minutes? Well, we are about to find out. I gave a lot of thought as to how I wanted to approach this review, and I think that rather than do it arc by arc, I really just want to talk about the series as a whole. The reason I want to do that is because there are good things about this book and there are bad things about it. And it doesn't really matter which arc you're reading. The good things that are good, and the things that are a problem are a problem. So before I get into the meat and potatoes of the review, let's just talk about a couple ground rules before we go. First of all, background. So I was reading Batman consistently up through War of Jokes and Riddles. I don't know if I finished it, but I got pretty close and then I kind of fell off. Kept buying the book, but like I said in my last video, I just wasn't reading it. It was just piling up. As a result, when I went back to reread, I started with issue 24. Every epilogue is a prelude. This is the issue where Batman proposes to Catwoman. I did not go back and look at these first arcs. As a result, I will give my opinion on the series as a whole, but I probably will have less to say about these earlier ones. And the reason is because I literally haven't read these in 5 years. That said, I will try to incorporate them as much as I remember them. Another ground rule is I am truly on issue 85. So I have not read 86 or beyond. I don't know what's going on with DC right now. I haven't read Doomsday Clock. I haven't read Heroes in Crisis. Long story short, there's a lot of stuff I don't know. You are gonna get my perspective on Tom King's run in and of itself and not really outside of that. In a similar vein, I have not read reviews. I have not watched your guys' reviews. I'm not on social media with the exception of my YouTube channel. Like, this is literally all that I do from a social media standpoint. So the zeitgeist goings on outside of what's in the pages is completely foreign to me. I'm hoping that I will have something unique and interesting to bring to this book. But since I have not seen your guys' videos, I may end up repeating a lot of talking points you guys have already made, and if I do, I apologize. But hopefully there will be something interesting in here. If nothing else, hopefully you just enjoy the sound of my voice. So, what did I think of Tom King's run on Batman? Based on my last video, you're probably expecting me to say that I really did not like it. Not actually the case. I did enjoy this book. It's not perfect. There are things about it that are quite bad, but there are some shining lights as well, and I definitely want to give this book its fair shake. I want to start with Scott Snyder, to be honest, because Scott Snyder left Batman kind of in an interesting place. I really liked the first half of Batman by Scott Snyder. The second half I was not as interested in for whatever reason. I think I was just getting tired of Scott Snyder's voice as a writer. But what I liked about the direction Batman took during the New 52 era was it was less about woe is me, my parents are dead, and it was more about I have a son, I've got this extended Bat family, and I want to put my best foot forward and, you know, grow up as a character a little bit. He's less wallowing in his own misery and more becoming a father and a billionaire and a philanthropist and all that kind of stuff. Grant Morrison laid the work for that, and Batman Incorporated. I think that Scott Snyder, to a certain degree, continued it. And what I like about Tom King's run is that if you summarized his entire arc as a whole, I think that he really challenged that idea. He said, okay, if that's where Batman is going, let's test his resolve to be that new person. And that's something that I really liked, because basically what you had was, you know, if Batman's truly over his parents' death, so to speak, which of course Batman never really will be, but I digress, you're gonna have him get married to Catwoman. It's a great next step for him to take. At least I think. I would imagine that's probably a controversial statement. I have no problem with that. I thought it was an interesting idea. So he's going to take this next step forward, and then they're going to put this giant roadblock in his way. And you're literally going to bring Batman's dad back from death to throw a giant wrench in his plans and literally drag him back into the wallowing in self-misery that he's been in for decades. And I thought that was a really, really smart direction to go after the Scott Snyder run of, well, okay, are you really over your parents' death? Well, let's literally put it front and center in your face. And a lot of what happens in these arcs is, I think, built around that concept. So I appreciated that. If you take Tom King's entire run as a whole and just boil it down into a 2-minute elevator pitch and you say, look, we're going to have Batman versus Bane. Bane's going to take over Gotham and he's going to brainwash all the criminals of Gotham, and you're going to have this sort of bizarro world where Hugo Strange is now the new Commissioner Gordon, and you're going to have Firefly, who's now a firefighter in Gotham City, and you're going to have Batman engaged to Catwoman and have to have her retrain him in order to be able to face Bane one more time. And meanwhile, it turns out Batman's father is pulling all the strings. Like, the 2-minute elevator pitch for this book sounds amazing, and it sounds incredibly exciting. And it's interesting that in my last video, when I started talking about this series, all the comments were, this book is boring, I dropped it after issue 50, etc., etc., the book is dull, the book is boring. Why did that not translate? And that's where we get into the cons of this book. I think editorial lets this book down a lot. At the end of the day, the number one problem with this book is that it's twice a month, and it's a 50-issue series that is now 85 issues. Or it's like a 40-issue series that is extended out to 85 issues. What happens is you get a bunch of issues that are kind of random filler. We'll go through kind of the whole timeline and how it all kind of shakes out. But even within single issues, Tom King will write, there's a lot of voiceover where, like, for example, in issue 50 with the wedding of Batman and Catwoman, she writes in the letter saying they're not going to get married, and it's extended, page after page of this basically stuff happening, art happening on the page, and just bubbles of her reading this letter, or Batman reading this letter to himself, or whatever it was, and really just killing time waiting for the book to be over, because nothing's going to happen other than the only point of that issue is Catwoman leaves Batman at the altar. That's it. That's 2 pages, but it's extended into this huge anniversary-sized issue. But if you look at the arc of everything, breaking it down, you'll get a sense of the problems with how Tom King paces this, or editorial had Tom King pace this. So first, you get the introduction of Gotham Girl, you get the reintroduction of this new Venom, laying the seeds for Bane down the road, and it's a fun start. It's got a lot of bombast. You got Batman trying to stop an airplane, if I remember correctly, was like just riding an airplane into Gotham City or something. It was like ridiculous and over the top, but it was a fun way to start. And you're laying some seeds. You continue to lay seeds, you reintroduce Catwoman, you reintroduce Bane, and then you get to Batman proposes to Catwoman. And this is when the book really slows down, because basically you have Batman proposing to Catwoman, and she hasn't said yes or no. Boom, you immediately go into the War of Jokes and Riddles. And I'll talk more about the War of Jokes and Riddles specifically a little bit later, but the War of Jokes and Riddles is Batman telling Catwoman a story before she says yes or no. He wants her to know everything about him, and so we spend basically, I don't remember, it was like 8 issues or something. I want to say it was 8 or 9 issues of him telling this story. And the story on its own merits, I think, is actually a good story. But the point of it is for Catwoman to say yes or no. So Batman proposes. That's a major event. Then you're going to wait 8 issues before the next major event, which is Catwoman saying yes. Then you start to get the reactions. So you have Talia al Ghul. Obviously, she's got a lot to say about, Batman being proposed to Catwoman and whether Catwoman's worthy or not. So you get kind of an aside with her. You get Superman's opinion and Batman explaining to Superman, or I don't remember how, they don't really talk much, but, theoretically it's like Superman giving his approval. You have the double date with Superman and Lois Lane and Batman and Catwoman, which, again, kind of a fun aside, but really you're just evaluating what happened several books ago, which is Catwoman saying yes, which was in and of itself a small incremental step forward from Batman proposing, which was now at this point 20 issues ago. Wonder Woman gives her opinion. You've got this aside with Poison Ivy. I don't remember exactly how this tied into the wedding piece of it, other than that Batman and Catwoman were spared from Ivy's brain control or whatever. What's funny is this is a book I read a week ago. I really don't remember all the specifics because there's just been a lot since then. You start getting closer to the wedding, and you've got this tale where Booster Gold changes history. Again, it's kind of digging into Batman not being ready to let go of his family or his past yet, because now he's going to, refuse to come back to the present because it would mean his parents are dead. Interesting concept, I think relevant to the overall arc of the series. I think this is worthwhile, but on the back of all these other kind of sideways, we'll call them, sideways stories, you're just kind of going, okay, so like when are we going to get to the meat and potatoes of this? Finally, it's getting real when the Joker starts throwing his 2 cents in, and you have the idea that Joker's mad that he didn't get an invitation to the wedding. This is a great idea for a story. The problem is they spun this out into a mini-series, all building up to what was ultimately going to be a big letdown, which is that Batman and Catwoman didn't get together. This is what I mean by editorial really screwing up the story, because the idea that Batman and Catwoman do not get married, I think, is an interesting idea, and I think as we get further into the series, their relationship is more earned than it was at this point when they were quote-unquote going to get married. The problem is you had all these issues, literally, 20 plus issues building up to what was ultimately going to be the rug getting pulled out from under you. To add insult to injury, as you continue on, you start to reintroduce Bane and the idea that he's actually behind everything. You get this Knightmares storyline, which is when I made my video, a 6-part story arc where it's literally Batman trying to wake up from a bad dream. And not only is that dull, it doesn't require 6 issues. If you want to do 1 issue, you can maybe do something interesting with it, but you don't need 6 different takes of the same idea. But it's also kind of a repeat, because you had the Gifts storyline where Batman, has to deal with this alternate history version of himself. And then you also had the Poison Ivy, where she kind of took mind control of everybody else. This feels like, a similar story beat to those, except also on top of that completely unnecessary. So you're just totally treading water by the time you get to City of Bane, which in my opinion is actually a pretty fantastic story overall. The way everything wraps up in this is very interesting, and we'll get into spoilers and some of the things maybe I didn't like a little bit later on, but the point being, everything truly does pay off, but you had to wait until issue 75 to get the big 11-part arc that all of this was building up to, and it spent so much time spinning its wheels, building ill will. I don't blame anybody for never getting to this point. If you could literally do this just on its own as a 12-part series, and have like all the weird, like I said before, Hugo Strange is basically Commissioner Gordon in this new version of Gotham City. Like, all that stuff could play on its own, literally without any of this build-up. So it's too bad that we spent so much time spinning our wheels to get to a point where you get a Batman story that's actually could be a lot of fun for the hardcore Batman fans. At least that's my thought. Now, as I say all of this, I'm talking a lot about editorial. obviously DC wants to make money. They want to put this book out twice a month and charge $3.99 for it. Got to make the bank. It's not all on editorial. Couple things to say about that. First of all, for example, with artists, my opinion is, you can't be a great comics artist and have late books. There has to be a balance between, amazing looking art and being able to get your book out in a timely manner. That's part of the craft of comics, is putting them out periodically on time. Same thing with editorial. Editorial is going to drive these characters into the ground. That's always what they're going to do. They need to make their money off Batman because they have a lot of other books that aren't selling that well. Part of what makes a great comic book writer is being able to work within those parameters to tell the best story that they can. And I think that Tom King had a story he wanted to tell, and he wasn't willing to fit his story to the format. Instead, he forced the format to fit his story, if that makes sense. So Tom King in and of himself is not completely out of the woods in terms of responsibility for the dullness of this book. There are some particulars to Tom King's writing that I also found quite frustrating. One of the things about this series, and it happens a lot actually in City of Bane, in the big arc that's sort of wrapping everything up, but it happens throughout the whole series, is Tom King likes to always be telling you what's going on, 24 hours after the important event. So basically, a perfect example is in City of Bane here, where, okay, so I guess now we're going to get into spoilers, true spoilers. So if you haven't read it, or if you're thinking about reading it, I'm so late to the party, I can't imagine it matters, but spoilers. Alfred gets killed. Okay. That's a huge revelation. And the problem is, then you cut back to Batman and Catwoman on a beach. And Batman is retraining, and he makes a comment at some point about, Alfred told me he's safe, so I know everything's okay. And you don't know how much Batman knows and doesn't know at that point, if he's got something up his sleeve. And I think that Tom King's trying to keep it kind of a mystery. But the problem is, as a reader, you're just confused. And what ends up happening is there will be a big reveal that's basically 10 minutes after, you find it out, or I should say you find it out 10 minutes before you actually should have found out the big reveal. Instead, they give you the reveal up front, and then they spend the rest of the book explaining how they got to that point. So with Alfred's death, you get his death, and then you get Batman training, coming back, and then finding out, oh, actually, Alfred is actually dead 3 or 4 issues later, and then you finally get the emotional resolution to that. But Tom King has to backpedal to explain every major thing that happens throughout most of this series, where he'll give you the big moment at the beginning and then explain how he got there, as opposed to just showing you how he got there. And as a result, most of the time when there's something interesting going on, you're just actually confused, waiting to understand. Even little things, like in City of Bane, Batman's training, and sometimes he has a mustache and sometimes he doesn't. And there's 2 or 3 issues where it's he bounces between having a mustache and not having a mustache. And it's just unexplained until the last issue when Catwoman peels his mustache off. And it's okay, so he was wearing a fake mustache as a disguise. Something you could have predicted, but also it's creating unnecessary confusion in a story where Alfred got killed 2 issues earlier. And that's really what I want to know about. Why do I care? Why are you distracting me with little things of continuity that aren't ultimately that important? It's just part of how Tom King writes these books, and it really was detrimental to the story when you could have had Batman, retrain, come back, he thinks he's got everything figured out, and then the rug gets pulled out from under him, and you get that emotional punch right away, and you really have the opportunity to digest what happened, as opposed to, oh my god, Alfred's dead, and then forget about it, and then, oh my god, Alfred actually is dead. And it just doesn't, I don't think it has the same emotional weight. Maybe that's just my opinion. Well, obviously it's my opinion, but, my personal preference in terms of how stories are told, maybe other people like it the way that Tom King's doing it. I just really don't think that it served the story that well. It's too bad because like I say, I actually like in concept what he's got going on with this book. And as I was reading City of Bane, I genuinely, like, even though there were problems even within that arc, I found a lot of interesting things to chew on there. I really, really did like seeing Gotham City under the control of the villains and the different roles that those villains took on within that city. Genuinely, that could have been a book in and of itself. It's too bad that it wasn't. But yeah, like, disappointing in execution, but very interesting in concept. And I did actually enjoy reading it. And more importantly, by the time I got to the end of it, I'm actually very excited to read issue 86. So at the end of the day, in a way it did its job. Like, I'm curious to see what happens next. Alfred is dead. I'm sure he will be back. But I'm curious to see where they're going to go with that. I think it's interesting that, you know, Batman lost a father and has gained a spouse. I think that's interesting. I mean, I don't know, like, I'm certainly not implying that Catwoman is now the butler. Like, definitely not what I'm saying. But I think it'll be interesting to see, like, the emotional dynamic between Batman and Catwoman and how that develops with Alfred not in the picture. It'll be interesting. It'll just be interesting to see what they do with that. Hopefully they take it somewhere interesting and it doesn't just kind of fizzle out. And like I said, for those of you guys who are upset that Alfred's dead, relax. He'll be back. These are comics. Like, whatever. Give it a year. I guarantee you, like, as soon as Batman and Catwoman get divorced, the very next issue, Alfred's going to be back. Like, you can just bet on that, right? I mean, let's be real. Let me just organize these really quick. But, like, I'll give you my take on, like, I'm not even going to worry about the ones that sucked. You guys know which ones that sucked. I'm just going to give you my top 5, like, the books that I thought made the series worth it. And if you're reading them, check these ones out. Hopefully they make sense in their own context and you can actually read them individually. Maybe, maybe not. So first of all, the first arc was a lot of fun. I thought it was interesting. Batman dealing with supers in his city. Not necessarily an original idea, but the introduction of Gotham Girl was interesting, and I thought that it was just kind of a cool way to start the book, because it started with a bang and just got your blood pumping and got you excited for the next thing. Even though the book settled into a very slow soap opera pace, it didn't start that way, and so I appreciated that. I also thought David Finch's art was pretty good in this. I'm not actually a big David Finch fan, but I actually liked what he did with this. Another highlight for me, I'm gonna say the War of Jokes and Riddles. So, obviously the ultimate purpose of this was Catwoman saying yes to his proposal, which is unfortunate. If you just take this book on its own, there's a lot of good stuff to be had in here. I think the dynamic between Riddler and the Joker was really interesting. I think the idea that Batman, would pay one of them to turn against the other or whatever it was, I can't remember exactly, but the dynamics of how Bruce Wayne tried to control that situation when Batman couldn't control the situation was a little ridiculous and, again, quirky for quirky's sake. But I got a kick out of it in this circumstance. I thought that it was kind of fun. And I genuinely cared about Kite Man. And I thought his role to play within the whole series and how they tied that all together with a big bow was really, really well done, actually. I really thought this was good. I've heard a couple comments online of people saying that they thought this was just trash. I really disagree. I thought this was a high point for the series, and I really liked Kite Man. I liked that he popped back a couple other times throughout the series. I'm going to say The Best Man. Couple issues with the Joker here, also pretty good. I just like the concept of the Joker being upset that he didn't get an invite to the wedding. I think that this arc is just hurt by the fact that the actual wedding issue was not truly a wedding issue, and I would not recommend the tie-ins for this. I would just say, like, these couple of issues on their own. Pretty good stuff. Hidden gem to me of Tom King's whole run, I would say, is Cold Days. this is a great few issues. This is Bruce Wayne doing jury duty on a case where Batman apprehended, I guess it was Mr. Freeze. And ultimately, he's the juror that sides with Mr. Freeze when everybody else is ready to just throw the guy in jail. I thought this was surprising, interesting, quirky in an intelligent way, but also like really relevant because there's a lot of things that go on with like juror politics that, and I mean, I'm certainly not a legal expert, but it just tackles some slightly more real world, truly important issues around justice in general that I thought was really, really interesting. It was cool that they went there, and I thought that it was a well-rounded story, pretty self-contained too, so if you just pick up this, it's not going to be like revelations, but it's a really, really solid story, really good Bruce Wayne story. All right, and then last but not least, so I said top 5. This is all completely on the fly. I'm actually surprised I came up with actually 5. City of Bane. Fantastic book. The pacing of the story is problematic. The way Tom King lays out the information is problematic, but the core idea of this tale, the way Thomas Wayne's story is paid off in this, the way you get to see all the different villains in Gotham City taking on different sort of leadership roles in the city while Bane is controlling everything. I just thought that this book was a lot of fun, really interesting, despite some of the problems with the overall pacing of it. Definitely a recommend for me. I don't know if this is broken into 2 trades or 1 since it's 11 issues. Hopefully it's just 1 and you can get it at a reasonable price. I don't know that it's good enough to warrant 2 separate trade purchases, but just as one thick trade for like $20 or $25, definitely can't go wrong. Really, really fun. It's the only shame is that it's part of this series and not just its own 12-issue maxi series event. Really, really cool stuff. So there you go. That is my feeling on Tom King's Batman. I feel very rusty reviewing comics, but I hope you guys enjoyed it. I will be reading some more comics, catching up on the rest of Batman, and I hope to talk to you guys soon. I know what you're thinking. Did he review 85 comics or only 84? Well, to tell the truth, I lost track myself in all this excitement. But I guess you've got to ask yourself a question. Do you want to hear about the button? Well, do ya? Punk? Yeah, I did forget to talk about this. Funny story. This was actually my single favorite issue of the entire run. I only forgot to mention it. I had it set aside in a different stack, and it never came across when I was looking through the books, and so it didn't jog my memory. But just really quick aside, this was a great read. And also a cool way to do a tie-in. I have not, as someone who has not read Doomsday Clock, as a tie-in to Doomsday Clock, but also the impetus for City of Bane, this is how you do a crossover title right, where it truly, it's a place where 2 very big stories happen to intersect, and then that's where they put the crossover. Really cool stuff, good art, and this particular issue where it's, Batman trying to survive 1 minute with the Reverse Flash is fantastic. It's basically any Batman versus Superman story you've seen, except with way more urgency, way more danger, and it's not Batman has all the answers. It's literally, how do I last 1 minute with this guy? Really, really cool. So check this book out. Check out the button if you didn't read it. It was actually really good, and I forgot to mention it, so apologies there. Anyway, I'll talk to y'all later.